You have a boss. Maybe not one person with that exact title, but someone, somewhere above you, whose approval you need, who can tell you what to do, who has more than you do, and answers to someone with even more than that. And it feels like the natural order of things because it always has been this way. Humans have always had chiefs, kings, bosses, people at the top and people at the bottom. That's just how our species works. Except it isn't. For the overwhelming majority of the time human beings have existed on this planet, there were no bosses at all. Nobody could give another person an order and expect it to be obeyed. And on the rare occasion someone tried, the group had a set of tools, sharp, deliberate, sometimes brutal tools, for putting that person back in their place. By the end of this video, you'll understand that hierarchy itself, the boss, the king, the billionaire, the whole idea of some people ranking above others, is not human nature. It's a recent invention, and we know with surprising precision roughly when and how it got switched on. Start with the deep past, because that's where the real baseline is. Anatomically modern humans have been around for something like 200,000 to 300,000 years, and for almost all of that time, we lived in small mobile bands of hunter-gatherers. And when anthropologists study the hunter-gatherer societies that survived into modern times, they find something that genuinely startled early researchers. These societies are not just loosely equal. They are fiercely, aggressively equal. There is no chief who can command. There is no one who eats first, sleeps in the big house, or gives orders that others must follow. And crucially, this equality is not some natural gentleness, some peaceful absence of ambition. It is enforced, actively, deliberately, every single day. The anthropologist Christopher Boehm gave this its name in his book, Hierarchy in the Forest. He called it reverse dominance hierarchy, and the idea is as clever as it sounds. In a troop of chimpanzees, our close relatives, a strong, ambitious male dominates everyone below him. Humans, Boehm argued, took that pyramid and flipped it upside down. Instead of one dominant individual controlling the group as a whole bands together to dominate any individual who tries to rise too high. The many keep the one in check. Ambition doesn't get you to the top. It gets you slapped back down. And the tools for slapping it down are worth knowing in detail because you still carry every one of them. The first and gentlest is mockery. Someone starts boasting, acting superior, hoarding, giving orders, and the group teases them relentlessly until the behavior stops. If teasing isn't enough, they escalate to shunning, the entire band acting as though the offender simply doesn't exist, which, for a human being whose survival depends completely on the group, is a genuinely terrifying punishment. And if that still doesn't work, the final tools are expulsion from the band, or, in the most extreme recorded cases, the group quietly deciding that a chronic bully has to be removed permanently. Between a joke and an execution lies an entire toolkit, and its single purpose was to make sure nobody ever became a boss. There's a famous illustration of this that's worth sitting with. The anthropologist Richard Lee spent time living with the Kung people of the Kalahari, and he noticed a strange custom he came to call insulting the meat. When a hunter returned to camp having killed a large, impressive animal, you might expect celebration, praise, status. Instead, the others would mock the kill. They'd call it skinny, pathetic, a bag of bones, barely worth carrying home. Lee eventually asked them why, and the answer was profound. A young hunter explained that when a man kills a lot of meat, he can come to think of himself as a big man, and think of the rest as inferior. So we speak of his catch as worthless. This way we cool his heart and make him gentle. Read that again. They were not being ungrateful. They had a deliberate cultural technology for reaching into a successful person's ego and deflating it, on purpose, to protect the equality of the whole group. Keep that instinct in mind. It's going to turn out to be much closer to home than a story about the Kalahari. Now, here's the part that undoes the lazy assumption. This equality was not because early humans were incapable of hierarchy or too simple to invent it. We descend from ape ancestors who lived in dominance hierarchies. The raw drive to dominate, to rank, to climb was always in us. Egalitarian humans weren't missing that drive. They were actively, consciously suppressing it every day, using the entire toolkit we just described. Living without bosses was not humanity's default sleep mode. It was an achievement, a thing our ancestors worked at, maintained, and defended for tens of thousands of years, precisely because they understood at some level how easily one person could otherwise dominate everyone else. So if humans were this good at preventing bosses, this vigilant, this committed, then the real question flips around. It's not why did some societies become equal? It's what on earth broke the system that had held for 200,000 years. What was powerful enough to overwhelm a defense that ancient and that deep? The obvious answer everyone reaches for is agriculture. People started farming and boom, kings appeared. But the real story, laid out by scholars like the political scientist James C. Scott, is stranger and more specific than that, and the timing is the giveaway. The first crops were domesticated around 10,000 years ago. The first real states, with kings and tax collectors and genuine top-down power, don't show up until around 5,000 years ago. That's a gap of roughly 4,000 years, 40 centuries, where humans farmed without submitting to bosses. Agriculture alone, it turns out, did not create hierarchy. Something inside agriculture did, and it took thousands of years to fully bite. That something was surplus, and more importantly, storable, hoardable, controllable surplus. Think about what you actually can and can't do with wealth in a foraging world. You kill an antelope, and you have a few hundred pounds of meat that will rot in days. You physically cannot hoard it. The only sensible thing to do with a surplus of meat is share it, which is exactly why sharing was sacred. But grain is different. Grain is dry. Grain sits in a storehouse for years. Grain can be counted, measured, taxed, owned, and crucially, withheld. For the first time in human history, it became possible for one person to accumulate vastly more of the thing everyone needed to survive, and to control who got access to it. The off switch that had always worked, the mockery, the shunning, was built for a world where nobody could get that far ahead in the first place. Once some people could control the surplus, everything cascaded. The ones who managed the storehouses, organized the labor, and controlled the granaries became the first big men, then chiefs, then kings. And notice what shows up right alongside them. Writing. The earliest writing, as we saw with the story of money, wasn't poetry. It was accounting. It was the tool that let elites track who owed what, levy taxes, and make a surplus flow reliably upward into their own hands. Scott points out that writing and the state arrived together, because a boss who can only remember and shout can rule a village, but a boss who can write can rule a kingdom he will never even see. Now, it would be too neat to say this was one clean switch, flipped once, locked forever, and here it's worth being honest about the complications. The anthropologists David Graeber and David Wengrow, in The Dawn of Everything, gathered a striking amount of evidence that humans didn't march in a straight line from equality to hierarchy at all. Some foraging societies built temporary kings. Some large farming societies stayed strikingly equal. And most remarkably, some groups switched back and forth by season, gathering into large communities under a commanding leader for part of the year, then dissolving that authority completely and scattering into equal bands for the rest. They would build a hierarchy in the summer and dismantle it by winter, as if to remind themselves that the crown could always come off. Which tells you something crucial. For a very long time, hierarchy wasn't a trap humans fell into. It was a costume they could put on and take off because they still remembered how to take it off. So here's the real turning point. The actual invention at the heart of this story. It wasn't the first boss. Ambitious people had always tried to dominate. The real invention was the first situation in which the ancient off switch stopped working. You can mock a boastful hunter into humility. You cannot mock a king who sits on a granary the whole city depends on and is guarded by men with spears he pays and feeds. The moment power became something a person could accumulate, store, inherit, and defend with force, the 200,000-year-old tools that had reliably deflated every would-be tyrant simply couldn't reach him anymore. The insult bounced off. The shunning meant nothing to a man who no longer needed your cooperation to eat. The system didn't fail because humans forgot how to resist. It failed because, for the first time, resistance had nothing to grab onto. And here's where this stops being ancient history and becomes about you, right now, today. Because you still have the off switch. You feel it every time a smug, arrogant, obscenely wealthy person gets publicly humiliated and something in you lights up with quiet satisfaction. You feel it in the urge to take a bragging coworker down a peg, in the reflex to distrust someone who acts like they're better than everyone else, in the way cultures everywhere love to cut down the tall poppy, to mock the powerful, to knock the arrogant off their pedestal. That impulse is not pettiness, and it is not a character flaw. It is the exact same reverse dominance instinct the Kung used when they insulted the meat, the same ancient machinery your ancestors ran for 200,000 years to keep any one person from ruling the rest. You are still running it. It still fires. The problem is simply that the hierarchies it evolved to flatten have grown so vast, so wealthy, so armored by money and law and distance that your 200,000-year-old off switch can no longer reach the people it was built to stop. So, the next time you feel that flash of satisfaction watching the mighty fall, or that itch to puncture someone's arrogance, understand what you're actually feeling. It's not envy, and it's not small. It's the oldest political instinct our species has. The one that kept humans free of bosses for almost our entire existence. Still firing inside you. Still trying to enforce an equality your ancestors defended fiercely with mockery, with shunning, with the refusal to let anyone rise too high. You have a boss today, not because hierarchy is written into human nature, but because a few thousand years ago some people learned to hoard the thing everyone needed, and the ancient tools that once stopped anyone from climbing that high finally met a kind of power they couldn't touch. For almost all of human history, the boss would have been mocked, shunned, and if he pushed it, driven out. And some quiet, stubborn part of you has never stopped knowing that.